Hello, my name is Doug Doyle. Welcome back to my YouTube channel, Shiblon Faithful. My last recording was back on February the 2nd, just a few days ago last week. And today it is February the 6th, Tuesday, um, 2024. I live here in northern Utah, like you know. Uh, and I wanted to talk about a couple things. I want to continue on what I left off with my last video. My last video was primarily talking about when I was a boy growing up in Western New York State. How as I would go to school, I would look back in the direction, turn around and look back in the direction of the sun, which had already risen that morning. So I was heading to school. I looked at it just a split second, and that symbolically gave me uh, something I really needed during those years growing up: strength and hope and comfort. Uh, and that was symbolic because we were not members of the church at that time, or at least going to any church, even though we were a good family. Um, so that was what I did then. I don't think I spoke about that to my family hardly at all, but that's what I did. Yeah, at the end of that video, that last video I put out last Friday, I think it was. Also talked about briefly about making a marriage strong by having God with you at all times, seeking after God, the husband and wife with God. Now, I used the symbol of the triangle briefly, but I want to talk about that before I start the main gist of my new video today. You think about a marriage, right? It's a triangle. You got a husband on one side, a wife on the other corner. At the bottom, at the top here is God. Now, a marriage, for a marriage to be stronger and happier, better, stronger, and more supportive, and all these great things, and the family as well. The husband and the wife need to always have God in their midst, in their hearts, to seek after God, to obey God and what He would want them to do. Now, that is important without a doubt. That will make a stronger marriage and a better marriage and a happier marriage. But think about it, as the years go by, as that husband, let's say the husband continues up that triangle, closer and closer to God Himself, and the wife herself to do the same, to come closer to God herself. So think about that triangle where they started. They're both one down here, and here's God, which is great and wonderful. But think about it, they're both at some moment, marriage isn't over yet, but let's say if they're at a point now where they're both at these points on this triangle, they are closer to God, but they're also closer to each other on this triangle. Do you see how that works symbolically? And that's also true in reality. That's what happens. The closer you become to God in your marriage, both of you, the closer you become to each other, and the stronger and closer your marriage becomes, the closer you are to God. So I want to stress that point. Now, I want to and remember this. This is important for those of you who are seeking to be married one day and those who are already married. Um, I'm divorced, so people may say, "What do you know about this?" Well, you can learn from your mistakes, right? If you don't learn from them, then you're going to have some problems. But hopefully, I've learned. Now, I'll talk about something here. I want to read entries from a journal that was written almost 200 years ago in 1846, 1847, and 1848 by a direct ancestor of mine, George Driggs Fuller, who was actually born in 1824 and died in 1895. And these entries were, like I said, 1846 through 1848, when he was about 20 to 22, not quite 23 yet. His birthday was on September 22nd of 1824. Now, he was born and raised in a small town called Oakfield in western New York, which is pretty close to the largest city called Batavia in western New York State, which is equidistant between the cities of Rochester and Buffalo. And it's out in the country. He was born and raised on a farm. He was a farmer. And this is back in the mid 1800s, of course. This is before the Civil War. Now, um, I think, I don't know when he went to school, but actually he did have schooling, whether it was taught in the home by his parents and or at a local seminary, which they had. Seminary back then could mean anything, not just a religious school. Back then it meant any school. If you look at the Webster's Dictionary of 1828 and put in seminary, it also mentioned the seminary as a word he used, George Driggs Fuller used, is a word for an educational institution, like a school, like growing up. Also, further education as well as you get older, a seminary. Anyway, I don't know what months of the year he went to school, but he definitely did. And those who went to school back then, and there are a great number that did go to school back then. Um, People think about the 1800s and the education the farmers must have had in America, across America, was poor and limited, and that they're all stupid and dumb. Far from it. Everybody's different in their intellectual abilities and their understanding and being able to understand and apply things that they learn. They hopefully will learn growing up and apply it in their adult life. Everybody's different. That's always been the case. But the schooling back then, I say, is much better than it is today. For the knowledge that they had, they didn't have all the scientific knowledge that we have today, but or maybe all the internet information that they had. But what they had, they used and utilized and studied very well. If you look at these entries that he wrote, I don't think he may have been a genius, but in my mind, he was probably just a regular farmer's son that was a farmer himself as well. He ended up being a teacher. He ended up being a teacher as he got into his early 20s. So he was a farmer and a teacher both. And he wrote a journal entries during that time, and he wrote a ton of them during that period of time. And maybe after that, I don't have that. That was transcribed by my siblings and my mother. Our mother found his original journal entries and transcribed them by typing them from written cursive that he had written himself to typewrite them and send us all copies. I got a copy here in front of me. I'm not going to read every single one there because there's a ton here, but I'm going to read some things here about how he felt. And he always addressed it. Not always, but a lot of times he addressed each entry. Some of them were super long, some were medium, and some were very, very short entries, but he made journal entries a lot of times on Sundays, but not always. And he had addressed a lot of them to the title of Mr. Future, is how he called it. Interesting. Now, this is 1846, May 17th, when he wrote this one here. I'm just going to read certain select ones. This is one of the longer ones, that particular day, May 17th, 1846. Think about that, how long ago that was. Okay. And I'll let you decide whether whether the education that they had back then wasn't that good. I'll let you decide that. Listen to the way he words this compared to how we talk today. Yeah. Okay, that's just the latter part. It is said that the greatest pleasure of life is love, that all the sources from which mankind attempts to obtain happiness must yield in fruition the object searched for to the unbidden promptings of celestial love. Celestial love. I like that. Okay. And the very, very last part, just a couple sentences after that, is he ends that particular journal entry for that day, May 17th, 1846. He writes this. It's all interesting. You get he kept abreast and mentioned in his journal from time to time what was going on in the nation. Now he put this down. The principal excitement of this week has been caused by the reception of the war news from Mexico, which causes quite a stir in the political world. Okay. From the date of this, if you receive that, and they've been talking about for a few days, that particular date that he put on there, that means it took about 2.5 weeks, roughly, for the news to get to Western New York State, to the people there in that rural community from Mexico, where the Mexican War started in 1846. I think it started April 25th, 1846, when it started. It took about 2.5 weeks for the mail to get there. So you didn't have the internet. Remember that? So interesting. Talks about the Mexican War shortly. Now, I'm going to skip over. This could end up being a longer than 10 minutes, which I'm going to try to keep my entries to less than 10 minutes, but it won't be possible in this case. Right now, I'm just over 10 minutes right now. Okay, next one is a few months later. It's September 19th, 1847. Okay, actually, skipping quite a few into a year and a few months after that last entry. And there's a ton of journal entries in between that, which I'm not, so this thing will take yet a long time. Okay, I'll just read part of this entry. Once again, September 19th, 1847. I have the means of enjoyment before me. I have only to remember that contentment brings by strict adherence. Pardon me, I misread that. I have the means of enjoyment before me. I have only to remember that contentment brings happiness, temperance, health, and that peace of mind can only be secured by a strict adherence to the great principles of eternal truth, honorable and open to all. Well said. I'll call him Grandpa Fuller. Well said, Grandpa. Well said. It applies today. Now, let's skip ahead now to quite a bit ahead, a lot of entries, to May 4th, 1848. Now, what he did, I'm going to explain some things. I'm not reading the actual journal entries describing this, but he took off in the latter part, I think it was October of 1846, and headed for northwestern Mississippi, one of the slave states at that time, in 1846, to teach. He had already communicated with them, and they let him know that he's invited to be a teacher to the students in that area. I think he ended up at one point with up to 30 students, he mentioned, which is the high point at that particular time. 30 students. He called them scholars. In fact, 30 scholars is how he called them. But these are students that he's teaching. So he left New York and he took the Erie Canal. Remember that from history, which is close to his home, west over to where it connected, I think, to Lake Erie. And then from Erie, he took another packet boat down the southern shore of Lake Erie, which ended up going past Erie, Pennsylvania, and Ohio, the northern shore of Ohio, and ended up near Cleveland, or kind of close to Cleveland, where he took what was then the Ohio Canal. He went from the Erie Canal to Lake Erie to the Ohio Canal, which went north and south, all the way from Lake Erie all the way down to the Ohio River on the southern border of Ohio itself, or kind of like through the middle of it. It went through Columbus, Ohio, and I think it went close to cities like Dayton, Ohio. And he actually visited Springfield, Ohio, which a friend of mine is from. Him and his wife were good friends of mine, and he is actually from Springfield. Anyway, so he talks about all these in separate journal entries, but he took that canal all the way down. Picture how you had to do this. You're not flying, you're not driving your SUV at 70 miles an hour, going from point A to point B. So here he is. He took it, the Erie Canal, over to Lake Erie, and from Lake Erie, just part of it, a stretch of it, down to the Ohio Canal, took it all the way down to the Ohio River. Then he took a separate, some sort of packet boat or whatever it was, or I don't know, a steamer, whatever it was, down the Ohio River, going kind of like southwest from there until he reached the Mississippi River. And then when he reached the Mississippi River, he went down to Memphis, Tennessee, and then he got out of there and traveled by land over to the northwestern corner of Mississippi, which is pretty close to Memphis, even though it's a different state, very close to it. And that's where he taught. So he left in October of 1846 and came back several months later in 1847. And then in October of 1847, he went on the second trip as a teacher, once again, down from New York, down the same trip, down to Mississippi, the same area, to teach again. He did that twice. Remember, this all before the Civil War. So he had feelings about what he saw in Mississippi and in the southern states compared to compared to the freedoms they had up in the north during that time. And once again, remember, he's a teacher. He's teaching these students, and apparently the parents would teach him individually to teach their child or children, more than one, most likely, uh, and that they were all gathering in the schools, and he'd be their teacher for a period of months. So that's what it was, his occupation. And he said he did that because he enjoyed it, but also because teaching, also because it would help his family financially. He was trying to help his family financially by doing this. So they had one less mouth to feed on the farm back in Europe, which saved the money. But also, he earned and saved a lot of money, as much as he could, and brought it back home. When he came back home, all the way up Mississippi, Ohio River, and the canal, and over to back home to New York, I did that to help his family out financially, which is pretty noble. That's pretty good. Now, on his way back, he's getting close to coming back. Let me just read an entry on the second time in Mississippi teaching. This is dated Thursday, May 4th, 1848. I believe I've heretofore expressed no opinion in these pages in reference to slavery, and he underlines the word slavery. He goes on, I have thought much of the subject today and can view it only with unmingled hatefulness. And he underlined those two words, unmingled hatefulness, thinking about slavery. And as the most open, glaring, and he underlined those two words too. That's how much he was strong about this. And as the most open, glaring violation of every principle of right which man owes to his fellow man. I'll read that whole thing again. I believe I have heretofore expressed no opinion in these pages in reference to slavery. I have thought much of the subject today and can view it only with unmingled hatefulness and as the most open, glaring violation of every principle of right which man owes to his fellow man. Okay, remember that's May 4th, 1848. Now, we skip ahead. Okay, now he's coming back after his second experience of teaching down there, second time, where he left in October 1847. Now he's coming back almost a year later, September of 1848. Now, this journal entry is written on Sunday, September the 17th, 1848. Today has been very pleasant, but rather cool, and we have been proceeding up the Mississippi. I think that's pretty cool. And tonight at 7 o'clock, we reach Cairo. That's Cairo, Cairo, which is a city on the southernmost tip of the state of Illinois, which was a free state. Okay, so he reached for the first time uh, the North, in effect, and freedom. Okay, and tonight at 7 o'clock, we reach Cairo, and my eyes have been once more gladdened by a sight of free soil. How about that? And tonight we're sailing up the Ohio, breathing at last the atmosphere of freedom. Well said. Well educated. Well put. Well said. And he had a good heart, obviously, in the right place during those times before the Civil War. Okay, I'm going to go on to 10 days later. September 27th, 1848. Okay. September 27th, 1848. This morning at sunrise, I set my foot at least, for me. This morning at sunrise, I set my foot at last on the free soil of New York. Once again, he talks about the free soil, New York. Now, next one is a few days later, Sunday, October the 1st, 1848. Let's see how much I want to read of this. This is a little bit longer one, but yep. Now, for give you a little background from his entries, and yeah, it did not strike me that he was exaggerated in his journal entries at all, because he wasn't telling stories to the world, trying to tell about, give an example where instead of catching a fish this big, he caught a fish this big, exaggerating, because he's writing these journal entries to himself. I'm reading it now, almost 200 years later, of my ancestor, my direct ancestor, Grandpa Fuller, but he's writing this to himself. And in many entries, he talks about he dated many women, especially in Western New York, where he lived for most of that time, and ended up staying there as well. Uh, so he was just a young man looking for love. And he mentions a lot of the ladies that he dated, and all in very good ways. I mean, good language, good attitude, proper. You can tell he was seeking love, true love. And there's one woman he really cared about the most, and he called her Miss F. F like in uh, Freeman. That was, he called her Miss F most of the time until the very latter stages of his journal entries, when he actually wrote down her last name and her first name as well, first and last name, on his journal. But anyway, he was in love with this woman and was seeking after her for years. Um, and she would, it just is up and down with a relationship. Plus, his trips to Mississippi didn't help matters at all either. But he felt like it was his calling to go do that those times. But anyway, for all that, as he got back home, remember, I wrote this once again on Sunday, October 1st, 1848. And right now it's almost 22 minutes into this, so I appreciate if you're still with me on this. I really do. Thank you very much. He writes, my old friends, and listen to the writing style once again, how he words things, really, and his feeling behind it as well. Feelings. My old friends, however, the most of them are here still. Change has done its work with many, but a few still stand up like rocks amid ocean's wreck, among whom I may mention McIntyre. That was one of his friends. Uh, the past year or two has acquainted me with the fact that I possess the affection of a woman for whom I have cherished love ever since I first commenced these pages. Once again, that's Miss F. And from this consummation of which I expect more happiness than I could ever derive from any other source. Um, he was frustrated with how long it was taking for them to get to the point of being married. But he clearly expressed many times his deep and abiding love for her. And that part about the celestial love that I read in one of the previous entries, that's what I think about as a member of the church myself. We all think about in the church celestial love, not earthly love, celestial love, here on earth and in heaven. Both. And his mind was in the same direction. Okay, now I'm going to skip ahead now to November 12th, 1848. Mr. Future. I'm not going to read all things at the very, very beginning of it. Mr. Future, the past week, this is, pardon me, from Oakfield, New York, November the 12th, 1848. The past week has decided the great question, who shall be president? And the result has astonished everyone. Now, he wrote, I'm not sure if I've got that right here, but he did, one of the entries that did make it very clear that he uh, was going to vote for, just before the election, just a couple weeks before, he was going to vote for the candidate of the Free Soil Party, who happened to be Martin Van Buren, who had been president before that time, once before. He had served 4 years as our president. But this time he was running again, and Martin Van Buren is actually from his own state, from New York. Maybe that's part of the reason. Also, that title, Free Soil, freedom, anti-slavery is my guess. That is who he planned on voting for, as he said in one of his entries. Yeah, but as it turned out, it wasn't him that won. He came in second, Martin Van Buren, I believe. No, I don't even know if he came in second. I think there's a Democrat. His name was Cass, Cass, that came in second. But the one who won was Zachary Taylor, who didn't fulfill all the 4 years. He died and then Millard Fillmore became. Yeah, Millard Fillmore became his vice president, became the president. So Zachary Taylor, that was the famous general, I think from the Mexican War, uh, was elected to and became the president. He became the president in March of 1849, elected in November 1848. That's what he was talking about. Anyway, it's all just this news here about what was going on is interesting too. Now, another thing about what's going on in the nation as well, he remarks about. Uh, on He writes to Mr. Future as part of that on December the 17th, 1848. So it took a while for the news to get there, but this is what he wrote. The great excitement during the week has been the California gold business. If I was not fettered by the claims of love, I would go there at all events. So he wasn't going to leave because the woman he loved, he wanted to be near her. But he also talked another time about earlier, before that, of possibly going to Oregon someday, but he never did. Anyway, so he, even though the gold rush, the famous gold rush of 1849, remember the term 49ers? Um, he was thinking about that himself as well, but he didn't. He stayed home, which is the wisest thing. Very wise. Okay, skip ahead here. We're almost done here. In fact, this will be the last entry. This is January the 7th, 1849. Uh, Mr. Future again, but in the middle part of that moderate length entry, he writes this. Last Monday was New Year's. I went to Batavia, took Sarah, that was her first name, this girl's first name, took Sarah to an evening theater, and then returned for a private visit. And after a long conversation, brought up the final question of matrimony and asked her to be mine, and received an unequivocal affirmative answer! Exclamation mark. Thus our relations have at last assumed a positive form, and we stand pledged by the strongest bonds that can unite heart to heart, that of mutual love, confidence, and hope. And he goes on from there. He finally won her hand and her heart. Uh, just It turned out that the love affair, the love between these two people, George and Sarah, back in the 1840s and onward, um, just a great thing in our family history. And I look upon it myself, and uh, I know exactly the feelings he's going through right now, that he went through. I know exactly how that feels, and what I hope for as well. Uh, and it's well worth waiting for. Celestial love is well worth waiting for between me and my future bride and God with us always. And may we all feel these ways. And if you're already currently married, or if you're going to be married one day, uh, may God be with you at all times. Be strong and of good courage. I love you all. Until next time.